What's up, you beautiful people? Welcome back to another episode. Today, I want to talk to you about what might be the best personal development book I have read in at least the last 5 years. This book was phenomenal. And I want to tell you, before I talk about the book itself, I want to tell you about how this book came into my life because it's a remarkable story, I think, of how the universe. Man, if you don't believe that everything is connected in the universe, then you just haven't lived long enough to see the patterns, because there's just these through lines that keep coming back up if you're in tune and paying attention. And this was a perfect example of that. So a couple of months ago, Jamie and I, we were living in a van, traveling around the Western United States, living up in the mountains. And I cannot pass up the opportunity to go into a bookstore. Whenever I see a bookstore, I just fucking love books, man. I have a problem. And we went into this little mountain town bookstore, and I was just poking around, and I saw this book on the shelf. And it caught my eye because it said it's a New York Times bestseller. And there's not too many books that reach that level of mainstream notoriety that I've never heard of. Especially in this space of self-help, personal development, mindset, all that stuff, because I'm pretty locked into that world. And so I was like, what is this? It's a book I've never heard of. Interesting. Okay. So I picked it up and I started reading it that day, but I happened to be reading 5 other books at that moment. So I read 10 pages. I thought, hey, this is a pretty good book, but I put it on the shelf, and that was back in June. Didn't think anything of it. Well, fast forward to about 2 weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago, for whatever reason, every morning, one of the books that I read is a mindset book. And I had finished my last one, and I was looking on my shelf for the next one, and this is the book that I picked up. And I started reading it, and I was 20 pages in, and I was like, this is incredible. For whatever reason, the lesson, the story, the ideas were really resonating with where I was on my journey at the moment. I'm going to share a couple of those takeaways from the book, so just stay tuned. Stick with me. This story is pretty crazy. And so I'm like, man, this was a really freaking good book. Well, I go for a walk that morning, and I pull out my phone. I like to sometimes listen to podcasts, and I pull up in my phone, and I'm in the Apple podcast player, and it promotes to me a podcast by Rich Roll. And the podcast, I've never listened to Rich Roll ever. I know it's a great podcast. I've just never listened to it. So I don't subscribe to it. So the fact that it's hitting my feed, I don't even know why it's there. But the episode in particular that they're promoting to me is Rich Roll talking to the author of this book, a guy I had literally never heard of before. And I was like, wow, that's pretty crazy. So then I started listening to this podcast, and I'm on my walk, and this is a 2-hour podcast. I'm 30 minutes into it. And the author tells the story of how this book came into existence. And that blew my mind. So he wrote this book. Originally, it came out in 2009. And it was a complete dud. It didn't do anything. He was really writing it as a business card to help him get more business for his personal coaching business. And it wasn't ever really designed. It didn't have a big promotional push to hit any bestseller lists or anything like that. And it did okay. He had a good business. This guy was a former athlete, former professional athlete, and he's coached Olympians, high-level execs, and all these people. He has a pretty good business, right? Well, fast forward to earlier this year, in January of 2025, so almost 15 years later, something kind of crazy happens. So the NFL, National Football League, they have these playoffs, right? And on one of the games, I can't remember, I think the guy's name was A.J. Brown, one of the players. He's spotted during the game on the sidelines between plays reading this book. And people are like, what's this guy reading? This guy's reading a book between plays. What book is that? And nobody's ever heard of this book. Next thing you know, this book overnight, literally the next day, is a New York Times bestseller. Sells millions of copies. And it becomes this phenomenon because it's an incredible book. But the crazy part is that same day that the book went buck wild crazy in the world's zeitgeist was the day that this author had kind of found himself in a financial quandary. He had found himself not in a good place. I don't know the details exactly, but He was effectively dead broke. His rent check had bounced, and he was on his way to giving this one of his retreats, one of his events. And he passes this homeless guy on the street, and the homeless guy, was like, "Hey, can you give me some money?" So the guy goes to the ATM and he pulls out all the money he has, and he gives him like his last $100 effectively. And I'm not going to tell you exactly like why he does that. Like, he gives you a good backstory of like some of the struggles that he went through back in the early 2000s as his professional sporting career ended. So it makes a lot of sense why he feels very connected to like helping people in need. But effectively, he was like down to his last dollars, and like things weren't going well. And as he's walking to his retreat, he looks up at a skyscraper, and he asks himself the question, would I rather own that building outright with no debt, no other co-owners, like $100 million building, or would I rather have written the books that I've written? Because a couple months before, in November of 2024, he had written his second book. And he resolved it, you know what, like, I'm okay being broke because I've written those books and I'm proud of them, and like that's enough for me. And on that same day that he kind of had that realization and gave up to the universe, kind of surrendered to this idea of ever being like a big financial success, was the day like then his phone blows up. And it's literally like, hey, by the way, your book is now a New York Times bestseller. So it's like really crazy how the universe brings all this stuff together. Okay, so I know I've buried the lead and taken a long time to get to the point, and a lot of you guys are going to leave a comment down below about like, will this guy just shut up and tell us what the book is already? You probably could have scrolled through the time lapse thingy, and you could probably just go to this part. But the book is Inner Excellence by Jim Murphy. This book, it says, train your mind for extraordinary performance in the best possible life. It's a book about high performance, peak performance, and it's really written towards like world champions, Olympian athletes, people that want to be like the best in the world at what they do, and yet struggle to find fulfillment and like meaning beyond just the activity that they're doing. And there's two ideas here I really want to share with you. The first one is this idea of the $10 million house, right? I already kind of alluded to like looking at the skyscraper and asking yourself, would I want that, or would I be happier with this? One of the questions he asks in this is like, would you rather have a beachfront property worth $10 million, no debt, or would you rather have a life where you never have like big financial success? You live modestly in a nice apartment, but every single day is filled with deep, meaningful experiences. You're surrounded with love, with a sense of purpose, with a sense of identity. And he's like, there was a time in my life where I would have taken the 10 million. He's like, but what I've come to realize is like, it's all about the deep, meaningful experiences and connection and resonance with the activities, the work that you're doing. And if you have that, the money will follow. That's a great thing. But like, if you have that thing, everything else is really irrelevant. Like a good life, isn't the result of having all of these fancy things. It's the result of connecting deeply with what you're doing on a level that makes you say, regardless of what the outcome is of this activity I'm doing, simply doing this activity for the sake of doing it is enough for me. And man, like, it just really resonated because it was a big part of like why I started on my entrepreneurial journey in the first place, was like to be able to do the things I wanted to do when I wanted to do them in the way that I wanted to. But you get separated from that mission statement as you go along, and sometimes we get attached to these external markers of success. We start substituting hitting dollar revenue numbers, and we substitute that for the idea of like what got us here in the first place, which was I wanted to make stuff that has an impact. And yeah, revenue is a way of measuring that, but it's not the goal, right? Bezos, we did another podcast recently about this. Like, he calls this process by proxy. And what that means is like, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that the process, the way that we do things, is not actually the thing that we're doing. And we start to connect, oh, this is the Amazon way of delivering the product. And it's like, no. It's not the Amazon way. That's not why we're in business, isn't to do things the Amazon way. The reason that we're in business is to deliver an impact on the customer, to make the world a better place, right? And the process is just the way that we do that. And so the same way, like your sport, your activity, your business is a vehicle for you to deliver something to the world. And the question that you have to ask yourself is like, what is that thing that you're delivering? And what is the thing that you're seeking to get out of that? And he shared this idea, this word called Zoe, which is a Greek term, which means fullness of life. And I love that term so much. That word is so powerful that we've decided actually we're going to name our dog that we're getting here in like the next week, Zoe, because I think there is no higher pursuit than to live a full life. I think that's like a beautiful thing to aspire to. And this book gives a lot of different ways of thinking about that concept and keeping it at the forefront of your mind. So very cool. Second concept that I want to share with you guys. This one was really powerful. So he shares this idea that there's 4 keys to resonance under pressure, which is how do you remain poised when everything is falling apart, or when you're in the midst of battle, in the midst of competition, and things are heated, right? And you want so desperately to win. Well, he shared this idea. Well, he shared 4 ideas, but there's one in particular that kind of like made me stop and go, oh, that's really good. And that idea is that the goal is to love your opponent. If you can love your opponent in the midst of battle, because you recognize that for you to be your best requires them to be at their best. You can't rise to your highest level unless you are challenged to rise there. And your opponent is the vehicle, is the proxy by which you get the opportunity to rise to your highest level. It's actually a really beautiful concept that if you're losing in the game, it's because they are challenging you, and you've either found your limit and that person is beyond it, which is great. Awesome. You've discovered this, or you have not yet tapped into your full capacity. And in both of those, I found it to be really helpful as a reframe, instead of focusing on the outcome and beating this person, but recognizing that I can't be my best without this person. It's a dance. I need this competition. And it doesn't have to be a person, right? If you're building a business, it could be the market. It could be this other competitor that's doing a similar thing. They're forcing you to raise your game. And if the goal of self-mastery is to just become the best version of yourself that you can be, then you can't do that without the friction, without the competition. As they say, iron sharpens iron. Iron sharpens iron, right? And so instead of being frustrated or being angry that you're losing to your competitor, love them instead and recognize, oh, they're helping me. Because without them, I can't rise to that next level. And I think that's a really beautiful concept. There's 100 of other beautiful concepts inside this book. Truly, it's one of the best books on personal development I've read in the last 5 years. So go check it out. Inner Excellence by Jim Murphy. It's a badass book. Absolutely remarkable. Going to be rereading this one again very shortly. Let me know, have you read this book? Let me know down in the comments. If you did, what were some of your big takeaways? If you have not, let me know when you plan to read it so that we can circle back, and then we can talk about if you liked it or not. So that's going to do it for me, guys and gals. We'll see you in the next episode.